The evening light was dying over the west suburbs of Chicago when Caroline Ashford pulled her black sedan to the curb and cut the engine. She sat for a moment with both hands still on the wheel, looking at the house across the street. Brick, 2 stories, a young maple in the front yard with leaves going gold at the edges, a battered pickup truck in the driveway, a porch light that hadn't been switched on yet, though the sky was already moving past orange into something deeper. Nothing about it looked like a place that held 8 years of unpaid debts. Nothing about it looked like the center of anything. She got out. She walked across the quiet street with a folder pressed against her side. She climbed 3 porch steps and knocked on the door. The door opened. Marcus Wade stood in the frame in a faded white t-shirt and dark work pants, hair uncombed, a faint smear of machine oil on the back of his right hand that hadn't quite washed out after his shift. The last of the afternoon sun cut sideways through the doorway and lit half his face amber, leaving the other half in shadow. He looked at her. He didn't speak. Caroline kept her spine straight. "My mother is gone," she said quietly, "but I'm returning what she took from you." Marcus went still, not surprised, not grateful, just still the way a man goes. Still when something he stopped waiting for finally arrives. When the door he long ago stopped knocking on swings open on its own, too late to feel like rescue, too real to look away from. From somewhere inside the house, the soft sound of a page turning. Nobody in that building knew why the CEO of Ashford Property Group had driven herself to a house in the western suburbs and knocked on the door of a maintenance worker, and the man who opened that door wasn't surprised which was the part that would stay with her longest. What had her mother taken from him? And why had it taken 8 years for anyone to try to give it back? Marcus Wade had lived in the house on Ridgeway Court for 4 years, since Noah was small enough to still ask to be carried up the stairs at bedtime. The neighborhood had good bones and modest ambitions, vinyl siding on most of the houses, chain-link fences in backyards, a convenience store 2 blocks east that kept irregular hours. His house was different in small ways that accumulated into something. The gutters were clean and properly angled. The porch boards had been replaced and didn't creak. The window frames had been repainted the previous spring, carefully, with the attention of someone who intended to be somewhere for a long time. Inside, the kitchen was a working kitchen coffee maker on the counter, dish rack beside the sink with 2 plates and a mug turned upside down to dry. The refrigerator had a drawing held up by a magnet shaped like the state of Illinois. The drawing showed a tall building with a spiral staircase visible through the glass walls and a rooftop dome that the artist had colored in yellow crayon, with careful rays of light coming off the glass. On the wall of the living room, mounted without frames between the television and the window, were 3 architectural drawings. The paper had gone slightly amber at the corners. They were old, and they were technical load distribution diagrams, elevation profiles, the kind of precise structural draftsmanship that takes years of formal training to develop and a particular kind of mind to sustain. Most people who came to the house didn't know what they were looking at. Nobody asked about them. On the kitchen shelf, in the spot where some families kept a cookbook or a radio, there was a single photograph in a plain wood frame. A young woman in a white dress, laughing at something off camera, one hand raised as if she was about to say something. No other photographs anywhere in the house. Marcus had gotten Noah up at 6:30 that Tuesday morning, the same as every morning. Eggs, scrambled with a little sharp cheddar, toast cut diagonally because that was how the boy preferred it, a glass of orange juice from the bag of navel oranges in the crisper drawer. It was a routine they had developed together over years, and it worked the way good routines work, without friction, without thought, like a system that had been engineered to run clean. Noah came downstairs with his backpack already on and a sheet of notebook paper held carefully in both hands. He presented it the way children present things they have made, with genuine effort and genuine uncertainty. The drawing was a building. It had a cantilevered upper floor extending beyond the primary structure, exposed steel cross-bracing along the north elevation, and what appeared to be an enclosed glass walkway connecting 2 separate towers at the 3rd level. For an 8-year-old working in pencil on notebook paper, the proportions were remarkably considered. Marcus looked at it for a moment without speaking. Then he set down his coffee and crouched to Noah's level, and pointed to a junction near the base of the primary structure, where the cantilevered floor met the main column line. This column here, the load transfer at this point is going to run wrong. The way you've drawn it, You're putting asymmetric force on a single anchor. You need a secondary support point here, and here." He touched the paper twice. Noah took the pencil from behind his ear and corrected it immediately, without argument or question, because his father was always right about things like that, and because Noah had learned early that his father's corrections were not criticism but instruction, which is a different thing entirely. Before they left, Marcus stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked at the photograph on the shelf. Then he picked up his work bag and his keys and pulled the front door closed behind them. His phone had buzzed at 7 with a dispatch message. "Report to Ashford Tower, basement level, pressure anomaly in the primary water supply system, possible interaction with the structural substrate." He had read the message in the driveway with the morning still cool around him. He had looked at the name of the building for a count of 3, maybe 4. Then he typed back, "On my way." He had known that building's name for 8 years. He had thought about it more than he had told anyone. He had never once driven past it by accident. Caroline Ashford had not slept more than 5 uninterrupted hours in any single night since her mother's funeral. She was not entirely certain what to call what she was feeling, because Eleanor Ashford had not been a woman who created space for easy grief. She had been precise, effective, and unsentimental. And those qualities had shaped the company and shaped Caroline, and now the company was Caroline's. And she was learning that inheriting something and understanding it are not the same process. The 28th floor of Ashford Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows on the east side that looked out over the Chicago skyline on clear mornings. Eleanor's desk had been removed, and Caroline's installed in the same position, same view, different chair, same weight of expectation coming in through the glass. 7 commercial properties, 460,000 square feet of Class A office space across the city, nearly 2,000 people on payroll, and 11 board members who had not explicitly said they were waiting for her to fail but who had also not said anything else. Derek Holst sat across from her that morning in a charcoal suit and a perfectly knotted tie. His silver hair parted with the precision of someone who has long ago stopped leaving anything to chance. He had been at the company for 19 years. He had been Eleanor's right hand for most of that time. He was the kind of person who made himself indispensable gradually, through small efficiencies and remembered details and the particular skill of being present without being prominent. "The technical records remediation for the basement archive needs your authorization today," he said, with the particular reasonableness of someone who does not want you to read carefully what they're asking you to sign. "We've been waiting on this since the beginning of the quarter. It's just a records clean up old paper files, analog backups that have been superseded. Standard procedure." Caroline had 3 other documents active on her screen and a call with the leasing team in 40 minutes. She initialed the remediation order. She did not read the attached scope of work, which specified the physical destruction of all original technical documentation for Ashford Tower stored in the basement archive room designated B2 storage, including engineering drawings, load calculations, soil reports, and contractor correspondence dating to the original construction. Holst took the signed document and aligned it against the edge of the table with one clean motion. Her assistant knocked. "There's a maintenance tech downstairs. He says there's a basement-level issue he needs to report directly." Caroline shook her head. "Engineering handles maintenance escalations." Holst made a note on his legal pad. The corner of his mouth moved not enough to be called a smile, but enough for a person paying close attention to notice. Alone in the office afterward, Caroline opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one that had been locked when she arrived, that a locksmith had finally opened for her. Inside was a single unsealed envelope in her mother's handwriting on the front. "For Caroline, when you're ready." She looked at it. She had been looking at it intermittently for 3 weeks. She closed the drawer. The investors arrived on a Thursday afternoon. 5 men from a Minneapolis development fund, doing preliminary due diligence, moving through the tower with the focused attention of people who are trying to understand what they might be buying. Caroline led the tour in a charcoal blazer, walking them through the 14th floor, which had recently vacated and offered a clean 12,000 square feet of open-plan space with good eastern light and the kind of high ceilings that made square footage feel more generous than it was. Derek Holst walked half a step behind her, maintaining the practiced positioning of someone whose role was to be useful on demand and invisible otherwise. The 14th floor had a long corridor connecting the elevator lobby to the mechanical room on the north end. Midway down that corridor, Crouched below an electrical panel with one knee on the polished concrete and a tool bag open beside him, was a man in dark blue work clothes. He was working with the focus of someone who has learned not to expect observation, hands moving through a task with the efficiency of a person who has done this specific thing before. The investor in the Navy suit, the one who spoke more than he listened, and asked questions designed to demonstrate knowledge rather than acquire it, stopped walking. He looked down the corridor. He looked at Caroline. Is this standard? Maintenance working during a scheduled client tour? Caroline looked toward the man at the end of the hall. Her voice came out level and flat, the tone of someone who has had enough practice at composure that it arrives before the feeling does. I apologize for the inconvenience. This should have been scheduled outside business hours. She turned the group back toward the elevators. Derek Holst remained a half step behind, and as the group moved away, he said, at a volume designed to travel, "Some people never quite grasp the concept of scheduling." Marcus Wade did not look up, but his right hand stopped moving. For exactly 1 second, his fingers rested on the head of a cable connector near the base of the panel. He recognized the marking on the connector, a small alphanumeric notation, in a system he had developed himself during the design phase to track load distribution paths through complex multi-system integrations. He had used it on every project he'd ever drawn. It was as identifiable as a signature. The connector was original from the initial build. The cable running from it was original. Every routing decision in the mechanical layout of this floor had come from his drawings, from calculations he had run at a drafting table in an office in River North that no longer existed, in a firm that no longer existed, under a professional license that had been taken from him before the building had its first tenant. He looked at the connector for 1 second. Then he picked up his wrench and continued working. Jean Fuller stood at the service entrance at the far end of the corridor, a thermos in one hand and a work order clipboard in the other. She was 55 years old and had been managing building operations at Ashford Tower since the construction phase, when the floors were still raw concrete and the windows were covered in protective film. She watched the entire exchange, the investors, Caroline's flat apology, Holst's remark, Marcus's 1 second of stillness. She had watched Marcus work in this building for 6 months, since he'd joined the maintenance contractor's rotation. She had known who he was from the first week. She looked at him across the length of the hall. He looked back at her. Nobody said anything. She lowered her eyes slowly, a gesture that carried more weight than most words she might have chosen. The call came to her radio at 2:17 that afternoon. The central air handling unit on 14 had failed completely. Temperature in the occupied sections was rising. By 2:30, 3 engineers from the building's contracted mechanical firm were standing in front of the control panel with laptops open, running diagnostics, trading technical observations in the way people trade observations when they're not sure what they're looking at. Jean called Marcus's cell at 2:40. He arrived 12 minutes later, bag over one shoulder, moving with the unhurried gait of someone who has learned that urgency and speed are not the same thing. He set his bag down and stood in front of the panel without touching it. He looked at the fault display. He looked at the intake manifold assembly on the right side. He looked at the status lights running down the left side in their sequence of amber and red. The 3 engineers watched him. He asked for a number 14 offset torque wrench with a 1/2-inch drive extension. No one had one. He walked out to the parking structure and came back from his truck with the tool, a snap-on with a worn grip and a drive head that had been replaced twice, and a kind of instrument that belonged in a precision fabrication environment rather than a building maintenance van. Nobody commented on this. People comment on things they notice, and most people in that room were not trained to notice what they were looking at. He worked without narration. He did not explain his steps or ask anyone to assist or hand him anything. When the system cycled back online after 17 minutes, status board clearing, air pushing through the overhead diffusers, with an audible shift in the ambient pressure, one of the young engineers looked at his laptop screen and said, with genuine bewilderment, "What sequence was that? That's not in any service manual I've seen for this unit." Marcus zipped his tool bag. "There's no service manual for a unit that stopped being manufactured 12 years ago." He stood up, lifted the bag, and turned toward the service exit. Caroline was standing in the corridor doorway. She had come back to the floor after the tour ended, without being able to fully articulate to herself why, and she had been standing in the open frame long enough to hear the exchange in full. She watched Marcus move through the space with the particular quality she had noticed before, not indifference to being seen, but the complete absence of needing to be seen. It was a quality she recognized because she had spent her entire adult life trying to develop it and still wasn't sure she'd gotten it right. Derek Holst appeared at her shoulder as he often did, in the space she hadn't quite occupied with anyone else. "Good tradesman," he said, pleasantly and without emphasis. That's really all. The words were reasonable. They landed in her the wrong way, like a picture hung a degree off level, not obviously wrong until you stand in front of it long enough. The structural alert hit the building's monitoring system at 6:42 on a Wednesday morning, flagged as a priority event, and routed simultaneously to building operations, the contracted engineering firm, and the office of the CEO. A visual inspection confirmed it by 8 o'clock. A crack, running diagonally across the face of the primary load column in basement level 2, approximately 18 inches in length, with a secondary fracture branching from the midpoint. Visible. Significant. The engineering firm's lead structural consultant delivered the assessment in the 28th floor conference room at 10:30, with a presentation that included photographs, load diagrams based on publicly available building specifications, and a recommendation. The recommendation was evacuation. Without access to the original design documentation, it was not possible to determine with professional certainty whether the column's structural integrity was compromised. Without that certainty, the liability calculus supported removing all building occupants within 72 hours. The board convened at noon. 11 members in the room, one on a video feed from Denver. Caroline stood at the head of the table, with her palms flat on the surface, and her expression arranged in the composed steadiness she had been practicing since she was old enough to understand that people watched the person in charge for signs of wavering. Derek Holst sat to her right. He had already prepared a one-page options brief. It recommended immediate evacuation, temporary closure pending further assessment, and engagement with a buyer he had identified as prepared to move on the land parcel at fair market value within 30 days. He named the buyer without noting that the acquiring entity had any connection to him. He named a price without noting that it was structured in a way that would generate a finder's fee through a separate channel. The foundational problem that no one in the room could resolve, that the engineering firm could not resolve with the resources available, that the company's own technical staff could not resolve, was documentation. The original structural drawings for Ashford Tower, the ones that would have allowed any licensed structural engineer to trace the column's load history and determine with precision whether the crack represented failure risk or a manageable surface anomaly, were gone. Caroline had authorized their destruction 9 days earlier. She sat in her chair and experienced the specific coldness of understanding something 3 decisions after the point at which understanding it would have helped. Jean Fuller knocked on the conference room door at 12:45 and pushed it open before anyone answered, which she had never done in 19 years at this company. She stepped inside. She looked at Caroline directly, not at the board, not at Holst. "There is someone who can read this building without the drawings," she said. Caroline said, "Who?" "The maintenance technician who repaired the 14th floor unit last week." Holst pushed back from the table with enough controlled force to convey disapproval without the liability of having expressed it. "Jean, this is a structural safety determination with significant legal dimensions. We cannot delegate that kind of assessment to," Jean said. "He designed this building." The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something has been said that everyone present recognizes as significant, and nobody is yet sure how to respond to. Holst did not speak again. Caroline went down herself. She took the service elevator, which smelled like cleaning solution and hydraulic fluid and age, and she walked the corridor to the far maintenance room where Jean had said he would be. Marcus was sitting on a metal equipment case with a sandwich and a hand-drawn diagram spread across his knees. The diagram was dense with notation elevation markings, load distribution vectors, flow arrows moving through a mechanical system drawn entirely from memory. The fluorescent light above him pulsed at irregular intervals in the way that fluorescent lights do in basements, like something breathing. He looked up when she came through the door. He did not stand up. "I need you to evaluate the crack in the B2 column," Caroline said. "I'm a maintenance technician. Jean Fuller says you designed this building." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he folded the diagram carefully, with the precision of someone who values what's written on it, and set it on the case beside his lunch. He stood. "Tell me what you need evaluated." They walked the corridor to B2 without speaking. The crack was there diagonal, 18 inches, with the secondary fracture she had seen in the photographs. Marcus stood in front of it for what felt to Caroline like a very long time. He didn't photograph it. He didn't take out a measuring tool. He placed his right hand flat against the concrete surface, fingers spread wide, and held it there in silence. Then he stepped back and looked at it from a slight distance. "It's not going to fail." His voice was even. "This is thermal contraction cracking. The differential expansion coefficient on this concrete pour was marginally undercalculated at this junction during the original design. I know that because I made that calculation, and I know where it was approximate. But the structural column beneath the surface is intact. The load path through this section is unaffected. The building does not need to be evacuated." Caroline said, "What's that assessment based on?" "Based on knowing exactly what I designed and exactly where my numbers were conservative and where they weren't." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked at the screen. "Holst, do not permit unauthorized personnel access to restricted structural areas. This is a liability issue, and I need to document it." She put the phone back in her pocket without responding. She looked at Marcus. "What do you need in order to prove it?" They found the room near the end of the B2 corridor, a storage room that the archive remediation crew had not reached because a burst pipe fitting the previous week had made the corridor impassable, and the repair work order was still pending. The door was warped and stiff. Marcus put his shoulder into it and it opened. Inside, under two collapsed wire shelving units and a thin coat of dust, sat a cardboard box sealed with brown packing tape. The label on the side was written in black permanent marker, in a hand she would later recognize on the drawings inside. "Wade Structural Engineering, 2016. Marcus picked up the box and set it on a clear section of floor. He pulled back the tape and opened the flaps. Inside, rolled and banded with rubber bands that had gone brittle and snapped when he touched them, were the original architectural drawings, hand-drafted on architectural vellum, with a precision and density of annotation that made the reproductions she'd seen in engineering reports look approximate by comparison. He unrolled the primary structural drawing and spread it flat on the floor between them, weighting the corners with his tool bag and a loose bolt from his pocket. The paper crinkled at the edges. In the lower right corner of the sheet, inside a small title block, Marcus A. Wade, P.E. licensed structural engineer, State of Illinois. Caroline crouched beside the drawing. She looked at the name. She looked at him. "This is you. 8 years ago. Your mother's company contracted with my engineering firm to design this building. Full structural package foundation design, column schedules, lateral system, mechanical integration." Then why she stopped. Started again. "Why are you working maintenance in this building?" "Because after the building opened, my firm was sued. The drawings were re-registered under the name of another company. The lawsuit went to judgment. We lost. I lost my professional engineering license. The firm dissolved." He was quiet for a moment. His voice when he continued was level in the way of someone who has said the next part to themselves many times over many years. "My wife lost her position that same year. The combined financial pressure and everything that followed, she didn't make it through the winter." Caroline sat very still in the basement light, on the concrete floor, surrounded by drawings that mapped the bones of a building that had been built from someone else's grief. Marcus looked at the drawings instead of at her. "I'm not here for anything from you. I came to this building because I needed to verify it was still sound. That's the full reason," she said after a long moment. "It isn't the full reason." He considered that. "I also needed to know whether it was still standing the way I built it." "Those are the same reason." He looked at her then. Just looked. "Yes." She reached into the pocket of her blazer and withdrew a folded set of papers, the contents of the envelope she had finally opened 2 days ago. Printed email correspondence, Eleanor Ashford's name in the sender field, dates from the spring of 2016, language careful enough to be deniable and specific enough to be damning. She set the papers on top of the drawings. Marcus looked at them. He did not reach for them. "I found these in her desk," Caroline said. "I think she left them for me to find." Caroline called the board meeting for 7 the following morning and arrived before anyone else. She had been in the office since 5:30, working through what she wanted to say and in what order, a process she had learned from her mother that was less about rhetoric and more about sequence. The right information delivered in the wrong order can be dismissed. The same information delivered in the right order becomes undeniable. She placed the original Wade structural drawings across the center of the conference table, unrolled and held flat at the corners with coffee mugs. When the board members filed in, they looked at the drawings and then at her, and most of them said nothing. Ashford Tower was designed by a structural engineer named Marcus Wade, she said, when they were all seated. Not by Hartwell Engineering, as our legal and corporate records reflect. Those records are inaccurate. The original documents are in front of you. Derek Holst was the last to sit. He looked at the drawings on the table with the careful expression of a man who is assessing options in real time. Whatever those appear to be, he said, with measured patience, the 2016 legal determination is the operative record. Hartwell's registration was upheld by the court, and what evidence was submitted to support that determination, Derek? He opened his mouth. He closed it. 1 second passed. It was 1 second too long. Caroline turned to her laptop and brought up the projection. On the wall screen, a chain of email correspondence recovered from Eleanor Ashford's archived corporate account, time-stamped from March through May of 2016. The language had the careful quality of someone who understood they were creating a record they might not want found. Handle the Wade situation before ribbon cutting. Registration needs to be clean before we open. I don't want this conversation happening after the building is occupied. She had printed those emails from the copies in her mother's envelope. She had read them 4 times before she stopped feeling the specific nausea of learning that a person you loved was capable of something you didn't expect. The conference room door opened. Marcus Wade walked in. He was wearing his work clothes dark blue, a faint mark on the forearm, the same boots he wore every day. He set a handwritten structural analysis on the table, and beside it a small digital load monitoring device he had borrowed from the equipment room that morning. He placed both items on top of the drawings with the careful deliberateness of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and has thought about little else for 8 years. He looked at the table. Then he looked up at the room. The column in B2 is not a failure risk. I've documented the thermal contraction pattern, cross-referenced it against the original load calculations, and taken current readings from the adjacent anchor points. The data is here. He rested his hand on the analysis. The building is safe. I can sign my name to that assessment. He looked around the table, unhurried, finding each face in turn. If anyone in this room still remembers what my signature is worth. Nobody spoke. Derek Holst, at the far end of the table, looked at Marcus Wade. The expression on his face had moved well past anger into something smaller and more fundamental. The expression of a man who has been telling a story for a long time and has just watched someone walk into the room holding the original. Jean Fuller stood in the doorway behind Marcus with her thermos and her clipboard. She had been working in this building since before it had a name. She was done waiting. Jean had kept the copies on a hard drive in the bottom of her locker for 8 years, password protected, unlabeled, in a folder titled with a string of random numbers that meant nothing to anyone but her. She had been close enough to the events of 2016 to understand what she was witnessing, and she had stayed silent because Eleanor Ashford had been her employer and because the mortgage on her house in Bridgeport had 12 years left on it, and because she had told herself, for 8 years, that there was no version of speaking up that didn't cost her everything. Eleanor Ashford was dead now. Jean had handed the USB drive to Caroline in the corridor outside this conference room, 1 hour before the meeting began, without ceremony or explanation beyond. Everything on here will hold up. It held up. The original digital drafts of the Wade structural drawings, with file creation metadata intact, predating the Hartwell registration by 14 months. The deleted email chain from the company's server, preserved in a local backup Jean had made before the server migration of 2019, the kind of cautious archiving that people do when they understand they are the only witness to something that matters. And the incorporation documents for Hartwell Engineering LLC, registered in the state of Delaware in March of 2016, 8 weeks before the lawsuit was filed against Wade Structural, with Derek Holst identified as the sole managing member through a holding company registered in Nevada. Hartwell had not been a firm. It had been an instrument. After Ashford Tower, it had been used to bid and win 3 additional structural consulting contracts with separate Chicago area developers contracts that applied Marcus Wade's design methodologies, his load calculation frameworks, his integration approaches, without his knowledge, his name, or any compensation to him. The total value of those contracts, $4,210,000, all of it flowed through entities connected to Holst, through 2 layers of holding companies that had taken some effort to trace. Eleanor Ashford had known about the original plan to displace Marcus Wade from the Ashford Tower documentation. The emails made that clear. What she had known about the subsequent years, the additional contracts, the accumulated revenue, the ongoing machine built on what had been taken from one man's career, was a question that could not be answered now. But the envelope in the drawer, prepared and left where Caroline would find it, suggested that at some point near the end of her life, Eleanor had understood more than she had admitted to anyone, while she was still in a position to act on it. Holst left the room escorted by 2 members of the company's legal team. He walked with the contained composure of a man who has already accepted the outcome and is managing the optics of his exit. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at the drawings on the table. He looked at the elevator doors, and then the elevator came, and he stepped in, and the doors closed. Walter Pressman, a board member who had been at Ashford for longer than most, and had a reputation for speaking the uncomfortable thing in a quiet voice after the noise died down, looked at Caroline and said, "How do you intend to approach remediation?" Caroline looked out the window at the building. Her mother's building. Her company's building. The building that a man named Marcus Wade had designed from the foundation anchor bolts to the mechanical penthouse, and that had been built exactly as he drew it, and that had been standing for 8 years with his name nowhere on any document anyone could find. "By returning what belongs to the person who built it," she said. 3 weeks later, in the early evening of a Tuesday in October, the light was doing the same thing it always did over the western suburbs at that hour, going amber and long through the maple trees, sliding in warm bars across the brick faces of the houses on Ridgeway Court. Caroline pulled her black sedan to the same curb. Same house, same truck in the driveway. The maple had gone a deeper gold since her last visit, the leaves ready to come down with the first significant wind. She was carrying a slim envelope this time instead of a folder. She had written the address on the front herself. She knocked. Marcus opened the door. The same white t-shirt, gone soft with washing, the same work pants, the same quality of stillness in his expression when he saw her, but something in it had shifted by a degree she couldn't name, and didn't try to. He looked at her for a moment, then he stepped back from the door. She sat at his kitchen table. He stood by the counter with his arms crossed loosely, not closed off, just the posture of a man who is accustomed to being on his feet. She set the envelope between them. Inside was a copyright restoration notice, filed and confirmed by the Illinois Licensing Board, reinstating Marcus A. Wade's original intellectual property claim on the Ashford Tower design documentation. A check the amount calculated by the company's legal team based on 8 years of standard consulting fees for a licensed structural engineer with his credential profile, plus accrued interest, a number that could not make up for what had been taken but was the largest number that fit within the category of what could be returned. And a letter, 2 pages, written by Caroline on plain notepaper in her own hand. She had not had a lawyer draft it. She had written it at her kitchen table at 11:30 at night, and rewritten it twice, cutting everything that sounded like a company, and keeping only what sounded like a person trying to say something true. The letter said, "My mother made a decision that took your name off something you built. I cannot undo that decision. I cannot give back the years or the license or the work your firm would have done. I cannot give back your wife. What I can do is put your name back on the record on the building, on the original documentation, in every registry where it should have been all along. The rest of what was taken, I know I cannot return. I'm not writing this because I believe this letter makes things right. I'm writing it because I have decided to carry what my family left behind differently than it was carried before me, and I wanted you to know that directly from me, not through a law firm." Marcus read it at the table. He read carefully and without rushing, in the particular way of someone who takes written words seriously. When he finished, he folded the letter and set it flat on the table with both hands resting on it. From upstairs, a creak of floorboard, then the padding of socked feet on the stairs. Noah appeared around the corner with his hair slightly flattened and a pencil behind his ear, and a drawing in his hand. He stopped when he saw the woman at the kitchen table. He looked at her with the frank assessment of an 8-year-old encountering an unfamiliar adult in his own home. He looked at his father. "Who is she?" Marcus said. "She's the person who has the building I designed." Noah shifted his gaze back to Caroline with a new and serious gravity. "Is it still standing?" Caroline looked at Marcus before she answered. "Yes," she said. "It's very solid." Noah considered this the way children consider information that confirms what they already suspected. He nodded once. Then, he held up his drawing, a new building, taller than any he'd drawn before, with a rooftop garden indicated in careful pencil hatching and 2 towers joined at the upper level by an enclosed bridge. He showed it to no one in particular, and then set it on the table beside the envelope. Marcus looked at the drawing. He reached over and pointed to the junction where the bridge connected to the taller of the 2 towers. "Your load transfer at this joint. 2 separate structures are going to move differently under thermal change. You need to account for that differential, or the connection fails under stress." Noah took the pencil from behind his ear and made a careful mark on the paper. He looked at Caroline once more, apparently decided she was acceptable company, and went back upstairs. The house settled around its quiet. Caroline looked at the drawings on the living room wall, the old ones, amber at the corners, mounted without frames. She had noticed them when she came in, and now she understood what they were. "You kept the originals." "Noah likes to look at them. He asks questions." She looked at the drawing Noah had left on the table, the 2 towers, the bridge, the rooftop garden. "He draws the way you draw. He draws the way he draws. I just correct the load paths." A pause settled between them that was not uncomfortable. Outside, a car went past on the street. The maple moved in a small wind. The light through the kitchen window had gone from amber to the softer gold that comes just before dark. "You didn't need me to come in person," Caroline said. "The documents could have been delivered through the firm." "They could have. I needed to say it myself." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You're not the one who owes the apology." "I know. I'm making it anyway." He looked at her, not with the weighted stillness of the first evening, not with the guarded neutrality he wore in the building. Something quieter than either of those. "Then carry it right," he said. The light moved through the window and across the table and fell on the drawings on the wall. Nobody left in a hurry. Neither of them had been looking for anything in particular, but sometimes the thing you have stopped expecting is the only thing that arrives with enough weight to mean something when it finally does.